A root that grows quietly across 6 continents is doing something most people never expect from a wild plant. It produces flour without wheat, without grains, and without any need for yearly planting. In fact, under the right natural conditions, this single plant can produce up to 6,400 pounds of flour per acre. When you compare that to wheat, which often produces around 400 pounds per acre, the difference becomes hard to ignore. It is nearly 16 times more food from the same piece of land. And yet, most people walk past it every day without noticing it at all. What makes this even more surprising is how long humans have known about it. For over 30,000 years, people have been using this plant as food. They turned it into flour, shaped it into early bread, and relied on it during difficult seasons when other food sources were not available. It supported survival in ways that are almost impossible to imagine today. Then, slowly and quietly, something changed. Modern agriculture developed new systems, new crops, and new methods of farming. And over time, this old knowledge faded into the background, almost forgotten. But there is something comforting in knowing that nature does not disappear just because we stop paying attention. It continues growing in the same places, following the same patterns, waiting to be noticed again. And by the end of this video, you will understand how this same plant can still offer a simple source of flour today, using nothing more than water, a bucket, and something that may already be growing near your home. To understand how this knowledge was discovered, we need to go back to a study published in 2010. It appeared in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, a respected scientific journal. A team of archaeologists, including Anna Revedin, examined ancient grinding stones found in different parts of Europe. These stones came from Italy, Russia, and the Czech Republic. What made them remarkable was their age. They were more than 30,000 years old. At first, they looked like ordinary prehistoric tools. Heavy stones shaped by human hands, used for grinding. But when scientists studied the microscopic surfaces, they found something unexpected trapped in the tiny grooves. Starch grains. Thousands of them. These grains had been preserved for tens of thousands of years, hidden deep in the worn surface of stone. What surprised researchers even more was where these starch grains came from. They were not from wheat or barley. They came from plant roots. Specifically, from a wetland plant that still grows across the northern hemisphere today. A plant many people recognize but rarely think about. Cattail. This discovery changed how scientists viewed early human life. The grinding patterns on the stones were not accidental. They showed clear, repeated, intentional movement. This was not random use. It was food preparation. Our ancestors were actively grinding plant roots into usable material, likely flour. And they were doing this long before agriculture existed as we know it today. This means something very important. The traditional story of human civilization often begins with farming. With wheat fields, cultivated grains, and settled villages. But these findings suggest that long before organized agriculture, humans already understood how to process wild plants into food. They were not waiting to discover farming. They were already experimenting with nature, learning from it, and passing down that knowledge through generations. It is a quiet reminder that human intelligence did not suddenly appear with agriculture. It developed slowly, through observation, patience, and connection with the natural world. These early communities understood something we often forget today. That food does not only come from fields that are planted and harvested. It also comes from wild spaces that grow on their own. The evidence becomes even more interesting when we look at the plant itself. Cattail, or Typha as it is scientifically known, is one of the most widespread wetland plants on Earth. It grows in marshes, ponds, river edges, and roadside ditches. Many people see it without realizing what it is. It stands tall, with long green leaves and a brown, cylindrical flower head that resembles a soft spike. To modern eyes, it may look like just another wild plant. But for ancient communities, it was something very different. It was a dependable source of food. Indigenous peoples across the world understood this clearly. In North America, South America, and even Australia, cattail was harvested and used as a staple food. Different cultures, separated by oceans and continents, independently discovered the same plant and the same solution. This shared understanding tells us something important about human survival. When people live closely with nature, they tend to notice the same useful patterns. They learn which plants can be eaten, which can heal, and which can support life through difficult seasons. Cattail was one of those universal discoveries. It did not need to be invented. It only needed to be noticed. Over time, however, human landscapes began to change. With the rise of modern agriculture, large areas of wetlands were drained or altered to make space for crops like wheat, corn, and soybeans. These crops became the foundation of global food systems. They were easier to store, easier to trade, and easier to standardize. In this process, cattail slowly lost its place in human food systems. It was no longer seen as a resource. Instead, it was often labeled as a wild or unwanted plant. Something that grows in the background rather than something to be used. Yet the plant itself continued to grow, unaffected by these classifications. One of the most striking facts about cattail is its productivity. Under natural conditions, 1 acre can produce thousands of pounds of root material each year. When processed into flour, this becomes a surprisingly large food yield compared to traditional crops like wheat. But unlike wheat, cattail does not require planting every season. It spreads through underground root systems, slowly expanding on its own. This means that once established in a suitable wet area, it can continue growing year after year without replanting. There is no need for fertilizer in most cases, because it thrives in nutrient-rich water environments. It does not depend on irrigation systems, because it naturally grows in wet soil. And it does not rely on human intervention to survive. From a natural perspective, this makes it an incredibly self-sustaining plant. It follows its own rhythm, adapting to its environment with very little assistance. It is not controlled by human systems in the same way as conventional crops. This is where an interesting contrast appears. Modern agriculture is built on cycles of input and output. Seeds are purchased, planted, harvested, and then purchased again. Fertilizers are added. Irrigation is managed. Equipment is used. Each season depends on the last one, and the next one depends on continued investment. But a plant like cattail does not follow that cycle in the same way. Once it establishes itself, it continues on its own. It does not create recurring transactions. It does not fit neatly into commercial structures. And because of that, it has remained largely outside of mainstream agricultural attention. This does not mean it is hidden or secret. It simply means it does not align with systems built around repetition and profit cycles. And so, over time, it became less discussed in modern food conversations, even though it continues to grow in wetlands across many regions. Scientific studies that do exist show that cattail roots contain a high amount of starch. This is one of the reasons it can be processed into flour. The texture and composition of the starch make it usable in simple food preparations. It can act as a thickener, or be combined with other flours in baking. The nutritional profile includes carbohydrates, minerals, and dietary fiber. These are basic components that support energy and digestion. While it is not a complete replacement for all food sources, it can serve as a useful addition in certain situations, especially when other resources are limited or unavailable. What is perhaps most interesting is that this knowledge is not new. It is ancient. It existed long before modern food systems. And in many ways, it still exists today, waiting in natural landscapes that have changed very little over time. If you walk near a quiet wetland or pond, you may see cattail growing without realizing its history. It stands there patiently, season after season, following its natural cycle. In late seasons, its roots store energy underground. This is where the starch is concentrated, especially during colder months when the plant prepares for survival. Harvesting, in traditional terms, involves accessing these underground root systems. They are usually found in soft, wet soil. When carefully removed and cleaned, the inner part contains starchy material. When mixed with water and allowed to settle, the starch naturally separates from the fibrous parts. Once dried, it becomes a simple flour-like substance. The process is not complicated, but it does require patience and respect for the environment. It is not about taking everything from a plant, but understanding how it continues to grow and recover afterward. Because one of the remarkable qualities of cattail is that it regenerates. It does not end with harvest. It continues its cycle, expanding slowly again. In simple food preparation, this flour-like material can be used in familiar ways. It can be added to baked goods, used in simple breads, or mixed into warm meals for texture. Its taste is mild, slightly earthy, and often blends quietly with other ingredients rather than overpowering them. Some also observe that its pollen, which appears during certain seasons, can be collected in small amounts and used as a natural supplement. It carries a light nutritional value and reflects the plant's broader role as a food source in multiple forms. What becomes clear over time is that this plant represents something more than just nutrition. It reflects a way of living that is closely connected to observation and timing. A way of noticing what nature already provides, rather than forcing it into strict systems. Today, global food systems are complex, large, and deeply interconnected. Food travels across countries and continents before reaching tables. And yet, in many quiet corners of the world, plants like cattail continue to grow naturally, just as they always have. This creates a gentle contrast. On one side, highly structured systems of production. On the other, simple natural cycles that continue without interruption. Both exist at the same time, often without crossing paths. And perhaps that is the most important reflection. That sometimes, valuable knowledge is not lost completely. It simply becomes less visible for a time. As we reach the end of this story, it becomes clear that the natural world still holds many quiet lessons. Some are large and obvious. Others are small and easily missed. But they continue to exist, regardless of whether we are paying attention or not. If you are comfortable sharing, it would be interesting to know how often you notice wild plants like cattail during your daily walks. Many people see them, but few stop to think about what they once meant to human survival. And in the end, perhaps the most peaceful thought is this. Sometimes, gardens, landscapes, and even food systems improve not through constant control, but through simple observation. Through learning what is already growing, and allowing nature to show us what it has always known.